thought you'd seen it all, but trust us, we're just getting started. These are 13 more of the maddest engines ever built, the kind of machines that make no sense, and that's exactly why we love them. From screaming two-strokes and steam-powered silencers to turbine nightmares that never belonged on four wheels, these engines weren't just bold, they were insane. Starting with Chrysler turbine engine. In the early 1960s, Chrysler did something no other American automaker dared to try. They put a jet engine in a car, officially called the Chrysler turbine engine. This wild experiment was a gas turbine power plant designed to run in a standard passenger vehicle, but there was nothing standard about it. The turbine spun at up to 60,000 revolutions per minute. It had fewer than 1/5 the moving parts of a piston engine and ran on virtually anything combustible. Diesel, kerosene, heating oil, jet fuel, even tequila and perfume. The engine produced 130 horsepower and 425 pound-feet of torque at idle, with incredibly smooth and quiet operation. Drivers described it as gliding on a cushion of air, almost like riding inside a hairdryer powered by a whisper. Chrysler produced 55 turbine cars for public testing. Between 1963 and 1966, real families drove them daily in cities across the country. The feedback was impressive, but the project was doomed. The throttle response was sluggish, the engine emitted nitrogen oxide emissions that couldn't pass future regulations, and it got horrendous fuel economy, averaging under 10 miles per gallon. Even worse, the government slapped a 70% import duty on the specialized materials Chrysler used to build the turbine blades. That made scaling up financially impossible. So Chrysler pulled the plug and scrapped all but 9 of the cars, most of which were cut apart to prevent the technology from leaking. Still, the Chrysler turbine engine left a legacy of bold experimentation. It proved that gas turbines could work in passenger vehicles, even if the world wasn't quite ready. But while that engine ran on nearly anything, the next one ditched fuel entirely and ran on steam. Doble steam engine. Steam might sound like a power source from the past, but the Doble steam engine was decades ahead of its time. Developed in the early 1920s by Abner Doble, this engine took everything people hated about steam cars and eliminated it. Instead of taking half an hour to warm up, the Doble could produce full driving pressure in just 30 seconds. That alone made it revolutionary and completely unmatched by any other steam-powered vehicle before or since. The engine used a flash boiler system that instantly converted water to superheated steam. It ran quietly, produced enormous torque from 0 revolutions per minute, and had no transmission, no clutch, and no vibration. That made it far smoother than any gasoline car of the era, and even smoother than most today. It glided effortlessly without the harshness or mechanical chatter common in piston engines of the time. The Doble steam engine produced up to 150 horsepower and could propel its cars at speeds over 100 miles per hour. That was unheard of for the time. It used kerosene or gasoline as fuel to heat the boiler, and the entire system was designed to be as automated as possible, so why didn't it take over? Cost. Each Doble car was handmade and extremely expensive to build. The complexity of the design also meant it needed skilled maintenance, and just as the Dobles were getting ready to go mainstream, gasoline cars got faster, cheaper, and more reliable. With today, Jay Leno owns one and says it's one of the finest cars he has ever driven. The Doble engine remains a monument to engineering brilliance. Proof that steam wasn't slow, it just never got a fair chance. But from Victorian power to Cold War innovation, the next engine is air-cooled and rear-mounted. Tatra 2.5-liter V8. In the strange world of Cold War engineering, few cars were more eccentric or more advanced than the Tatra 603. Built in Czechoslovakia and reserved for communist officials, it looked like a luxury Beetle, but cruised like a Cadillac. Hiding in the back of this long, rounded sedan was a gem of engineering, a 2.5-liter air-cooled V8. We spent hours digging through archives, patents, and old builds to bring you the engines no one else is talking about. If that's the kind of content you want more of, hit subscribe. The engine was compact, lightweight, and made entirely of aluminum. It featured overhead valves, hemispherical combustion chambers, and dry sump lubrication, designs you'd expect in a high-performance sports car, not a government cruiser. Despite its modest displacement, the engine produced around 105 horsepower and offered excellent torque delivery across the rev range. It could push the car to highway speeds without breaking a sweat, even when loaded with passengers and gear. Air cooling meant there was no radiator, no coolant to leak, and fewer parts to fail, an ideal setup for long-distance travel across the Eastern Bloc's rugged terrain. The engine sat over the rear axle, giving the Tatra unusual handling dynamics. It wasn't a corner carver, but it floated effortlessly over rough roads. Engineers also added a rear swing axle and long travel suspension to maximize comfort and grips. This V8 powered the Tatra 603 from the 1950s all the way into the early 1990s, with various updates along the way. Engineers even experimented with fuel injection and emissions equipment long before those technologies were common behind the Iron Curtain. Despite being unknown in the West, the Tatra's V8 gained a cult following. It was quiet, reliable, and mechanically bold in a time of political uniformity. It proved that even under restriction, great design could still roar. But for truly terrifying performance, you have to go two-stroke and two wheels. Kawasaki H2750 Triple. In the early 1970s, Kawasaki decided subtlety was overrated. What they created instead was the H2750 Mach 4, one of the most infamous motorcycles ever to hit public roads. It was a two-stroke 750 cubic centimeter inline triple that made no apologies for its raw, violent performance. At its peak, it delivered 74 horsepower at 7,000 revolutions per minute and could rocket from 0 to 60 miles per hour in under 4 seconds. That was superbike territory, except the H2 was barely built to handle that kind of speed. The frame was a repurposed design from a smaller model, the suspension was soft, and the drum brakes were completely overwhelmed by the engine's brutal acceleration. The result? A bike that wanted to go fast but couldn't stop or turn. Riders described the power band as an on-off switch. Nothing happened below 5,000 revolutions per minute, and then suddenly, boom, everything lit up. The front wheel would lift, the rear tire would spin, and all logic went out the window. It was unpredictable, unruly, and dangerously addicting. Even experienced riders had to treat it with respect, or it would bite back hard. It didn't take long for the H2 to earn its reputation. Magazines called it the Widowmaker, and for good reason. Many riders underestimated its fury and paid the price. Still, it developed a cult following that lives on today among vintage collectors, adrenaline junkies, and thrill seekers who crave that raw, unfiltered power from a bygone era. The Kawasaki H2750 Triple wasn't just a motorcycle, it was a warning label with wheels, a mechanical dare that tested your courage every time you twisted the throttle. But what happens when two-stroke madness goes full Moto Grand Prix? Honda NSR 500 V4. Built for the highest levels of Grand Prix motorcycle racing, this two-stroke V4 engine was Honda's answer to a brutal era of motorsports where rider skill mattered just as much as machine performance, and sometimes more. It was engineering at the edge of sanity. The NSR's 500 cubic centimeter engine produced more than 200 horsepower by the mid-1990s. That meant over 400 horsepower per liter, delivered in a way only a two-stroke could manage. It was explosive, with a razor-thin power band that surged all at once. Below 8,000 revolutions per minute, it was sluggish. Above that, it transformed into a rocket. Riders had to master throttle control, clutch slipping, and body weight balance to keep it in check, especially on corner exit where the front wheel begged to lift. This V4 layout gave the bike more compact dimensions, better mass centralization, and a more balanced exhaust pulse. It featured reed valve induction, rotary disc valves in early versions, and eventually advanced exhaust valve systems that adjusted power delivery on the fly. The engine screamed like a banshee and punished every mistake with violent intensity. The NSR 500 became one of the most successful race bikes of its time, ridden by legends like Mick Doohan and Freddie Spencer. It dominated the two-stroke era of Moto Grand Prix, winning championship after championship before the rules changed and four-strokes took over. But those who wrote it never forgot it. The NSR was not user-friendly. It didn't want to help you. It wanted to kill you. And if you survived it, you came away faster, sharper, and maybe just a little unhinged. Speaking of madness, what if a truck engine could scream like a banshee? Detroit Diesel two-stroke V12. Few engines in history have earned a nickname as fierce as the Detroit Diesel two-stroke V12, known affectionately and sometimes fearfully as the Screaming Jimmy. This monster of an engine roared its way through the 20th century, powering everything from military tanks to freightliners, buses, locomotives, and even boats. It was loud, relentless, and nearly impossible to ignore. The most iconic version of this engine was the 12 V71 series. That means it had 12 cylinders arranged in a V configuration, each displacing 71 cubic inches, giving it a total displacement of 852 cubic inches, or about 14 liters. But what made it truly mad was the two-stroke cycle. Unlike four-stroke diesels that fire every other revolution, this beast fired every single time the piston came up, resulting in a high-pitched, relentless scream that could be heard from miles away. It produced up to 475 horsepower and over 1,200 pound-feet of torque, depending on the configuration. The engine had twin root-style superchargers, not for performance flair, but because two-stroke diesels require forced air to scavenge exhaust gases. The exhaust note was unlike anything else, raw mechanical chaos. It wasn't just loud, it was apocalyptic. At full throttle, it could drown out entire construction sites, air brakes, and even aircraft flyovers. Detroit diesels were modular, reliable, and easy to repair, which made them ideal for fleet operations and military use. But they were also heavy, smoky, and inefficient by modern standards. Eventually, they were phased out in favor of cleaner, quieter, four-stroke designs. Still, for gearheads and diesel fanatics, the two-stroke Detroit Diesel 512 remains an icon. It was big, bad, and brutally effective. And when it screamed, everyone listened. But from mechanical rage to pure elegance, the next engine was royalty, literally. RollsRoyce Merlin V12. There are powerful engines, and then there are engines that shaped history. The RollsRoyce Merlin V12 belongs to the second group. Developed in the late 1930s in the United Kingdom, the Merlin was a liquid-cooled 27-liter V12 engine originally designed for military aircraft, but it quickly became legendary for something much bigger, helping win World War II. This massive engine powered some of the most iconic planes of the war: the Supermarine Spitfire, the Hawker Hurricane, the de Havilland Mosquito, and across the Atlantic, the North American P-51 Mustang. The Merlin produced over 1,400 horsepower in early versions and climbed above 2,000 horsepower in later models with the help of twin-stage, twin-speed superchargers. Despite its size and complexity, the Merlin was reliable and surprisingly adaptable. It had a single overhead camshaft per bank, operated 4 valves per cylinder, and ran at up to 3,000 revolutions per minute at full throttle. Aircraft equipped with Merlins had unmatched high-altitude performance and could climb, dive, and outpace anything the Axis powers put in the sky. But the story does not end with airplanes. Some mad geniuses have actually installed Merlins into cars. One of the most famous was a hot rod called the Beast, built in the United Kingdom, which put a Merlin into a street-legal chassis. The result? Nearly 3,000 horsepower and pure terror on 4 wheels. The Merlin T50 was not just an engine, it was a mechanical monument to ingenuity, power, and survival under fire. And more than 80 years later, it is still considered one of the finest piston aircraft engines ever built. But we're not done with V12s. What if you shaped one like a triangle? Napier Deltic 18-cylinder engine. It looked like a triangle, sounded like a machine gun, and powered both submarines and locomotives with terrifying force. This was the Napier Deltic, a diesel engine so strange it defied every convention of engine design. Introduced in the early 1950s, the Deltic engine was a masterpiece of British engineering that used a triangular layout to house 3 banks of cylinders. The result, 18 cylinders arranged in 6 opposed piston pairs per side, for a total of 36 pistons in constant motion. Unlike conventional engines, the Deltic had no cylinder heads. Instead, each pair of pistons met in the center of a shared combustion chamber, firing toward each other. This allowed for extremely high power density. In its marine form, the engine produced over 2,500 horsepower from a package roughly half the size and weight of a traditional diesel engine with similar output. The design reduced vibration, improved balance, and enabled continuous high-load operation, ideal for long missions at sea or full-speed rail hauls. It ran as a two-stroke diesel with a Roots blower providing forced induction. That meant explosive throttle response, high torque at low revolutions per minute, and a sound that resembled industrial warfare. These engines were used in British Royal Navy patrol boats and submarines, as well as British Rail Class 55 locomotives known as Deltics. The maintenance was brutal, but the performance was unmatched. With their compact footprint, Deltic engines offered a level of engineering complexity that rivaled fighter jet turbines. Even today, enthusiasts restore and run these engines as mechanical showpieces. The Napier Deltic was not just mad, it was brilliant, an engine that used pure geometry to deliver horsepower, torque, and chaos in equal measure. And now for something tiny, but terrifying. Gaga Mobile two-stroke twin. In the world of compact cars, the Gaga Mobile was as small and quirky as they came. Built by Hans Glas GmbH in West Germany during the post-war boom, this tiny bubble car came equipped with one of the strangest engines ever fitted to a production vehicle, a two-stroke, two-cylinder engine that did double duty in the weirdest ways possible. Displacing just 247 cubic centimeters in its earliest form, this little air-cooled twin produced a modest 13 horsepower, but what it lacked in raw output, it made up for in character. The starter motor also functioned as the generator. When you turned the key, the electric current flowed one way to spin the engine up, and once it started, the polarity reversed to become a generator. It was clever, lightweight, and space-saving. Because it was a two-stroke engine, it required a premix of gasoline and oil, and it fired every revolution. That gave it a high-pitched, raspy buzz, more espresso machine than internal combustion engine. Top speed was around 50 miles per hour, but that didn't matter. People loved it for its charm, simplicity, and the feeling that you were driving something totally different from the rest of the traffic. The engine was mounted in the rear, helping maximize interior space. Its minimal weight made the car incredibly nimble in tight city streets, and fuel economy was exceptional, even by today's standards. Production ran from the mid-1950s into the mid-1960s, and over 280,000 units were sold. The Gagamobile's two-stroke twin was small, loud, and mechanically strange, but it became an icon of post-war ingenuity. But let's scale back up to one of the last big American gas engines ever made. Chevrolet 8.1-liter V8. Big block engines are a dying breed, but the Chevrolet 8.1-liter V8 was one of the last true monsters to roll off a production line. Introduced in the year 2001, this engine was the final iteration of General Motors' legendary Generation 7 big block series, and it was aimed squarely at heavy-duty workhorses, trucks, vans, and RVs that needed massive amounts of torque more than anything else. This 8.1-liter engine, also known as the Vortec 8100, displaced exactly 496 cubic inches. It produced 340 horsepower at 4,200 revolutions per minute and a jaw-dropping 455 pound-feet of torque at 3,200 revolutions per minute. It ran on regular gasoline and featured a cast-iron block and heads, sequential multi-port fuel injection, and a hydraulic roller camshaft. But let's be honest, this engine was not built for subtlety. It was built to tow mountains. It powered the Chevrolet Silverado 2500 HD, the Suburban 250 Zero, and the GMC Yukon XL in RVs and medium-duty trucks. It was prized for its low-end grunt and long-haul reliability. Fuel economy? Forget about it. Most owners reported single-digit miles per gallon under load, but in return, you got an engine that shrugged off abuse, sounded like thunder, and kept America moving. By the mid-2010s, rising fuel standards and changing consumer tastes pushed the 8.1 into retirement. Today, it's a cult classic for engine swappers and big truck enthusiasts. One of the last great gas-powered giants. But if you think that's big, the next engine is pure madness, inspired by airplane. Mercedes M125 Inline 8. Long before turbochargers and carbon fiber ruled motorsport, there was a straight 8 engine that defied every limitation of its time. It was the Mercedes-Benz M125, a technological masterpiece introduced in the year 1934. This engine wasn't just fast, it was ferocious. It dominated Grand Prix racing with an elegance and brutality that no one saw coming. Under the hood was a 5.6-liter inline 8 engine with a cast aluminum block and twin overhead camshafts. But the real magic came from the Roots-type supercharger mounted at the front. When engaged, it pushed the engine's output from an already impressive 430 horsepower to a staggering 616 horsepower at 5,800 revolutions per minute. This was in the 1930s, a time when most production cars struggled to reach 50 horsepower. The M125 also featured dry sump lubrication, hemispherical combustion chambers, and a complex crankshaft designed to reduce vibration at high speed. It was mated to a 4-speed manual gearbox and dropped into the Mercedes W125 chassis, which had a tubular frame and state-of-the-art independent suspension. The result was terrifying. The car could reach speeds over 200 miles per hour on pre-war tires and crude racetracks. Drivers called it a silver bullet, and some even called it undrivable at full throttle. Only a few were ever built, and they remain some of the most valuable and dangerous race cars in history. The M125 wasn't just ahead of its time, it made time chase it, ready for one more scream. This last engine was built by Honda to rev to 21,000 revolutions per minute. Honda RC166 V4. Small displacement doesn't usually equal world domination, but in the 1960s, Honda proved otherwise with a race engine that shattered expectations and redlined reality. The RC166 was a 250 cubic centimeter motorcycle engine that redefined what small displacement could really do. Built to conquer Grand Prix motorcycle racing, this compact power plant was more Formula One than weekend ride. It was a 4-cylinder, 4-stroke V4 configuration featuring 16 valves and gear-driven double overhead camshafts. But the true insanity, it revved to an eye-watering 21,000 revolutions per minute. The RC166 made over 40 horsepower at a time when most motorcycles in its class barely managed 20. It weighed under 110 pounds, used a 7-speed gearbox, and delivered a razor-thin power band that demanded absolute precision from its rider. It wasn't just an engine, it was a scalpel with a throttle. Honda's philosophy at the time was simple. If you couldn't beat displacement limits, beat the laws of physics. They crammed more revolutions, more combustion cycles, and more air-fuel mixture into every second of operation than anyone thought possible. The result was a screaming banshee of an engine that could only be appreciated at full tilt, where its exhaust note rivaled the sound of contemporary Formula One cars. The RC166 helped Honda secure multiple world championships and permanently cemented the company's place as a racing innovator. But even more than that, it proved that engineering obsession could push the boundaries of reality. It was the ultimate small-bore powerhouse, brutal, beautiful, and completely unhinged. But now for number 1, a forgotten jet engine that never should have been in a car. Boeing T50 Gas Turbine. When jet propulsion escaped the runway and rolled into the garage, chaos followed. The Boeing T50 was never meant to power anything with wheels. Originally developed as a small turboshaft engine for drones, helicopters, and guided missiles, it was lightweight, compact, and built purely for aerospace. And yet, through a perfect storm of curiosity and madness, it found its way into go-karts, motorcycles, and even cars. The T50 was a single-shaft gas turbine that produced around 300 horsepower and could reach rotational speeds of over 60,000 revolutions per minute. It used a centrifugal compressor, axial flow turbine, and a fixed nozzle, essentially a miniature jet engine capable of propelling lightweight vehicles into chaos. At just over 200 pounds, the power-to-weight ratio was off the charts. It was the kind of engine that didn't just move vehicles, it transformed them into mechanical rocket ships. The engine ran on jet fuel or kerosene and delivered almost no torque at low speeds. That meant it needed a special reduction gearbox to be drivable. And even then, throttle lag was a huge issue. But what it lacked in drivability, it made up for in pure, raw spectacle. Fire shot from the exhaust. The whine was deafening. At full throttle, it sounded like an F-16 fighter jet preparing for takeoff. Daredevil builders and backyard engineers began mounting T50s into go-karts, custom drag cars, and even motorcycles throughout the 1980s and 1990s. While none were ever street legal in the traditional sense, they were cult sensations at airfields and drag strips. The Boeing T50 Gas Turbine stands as the ultimate example of putting the wrong engine in the wrong machine, and somehow making it unforgettable. It was insane, it was brilliant, and it sounded like the end of the world. And that's the lineup. 13 engines that broke rules, shredded expectations, and rewrote what power could sound like. Which one blew your mind the most? Let us know in the comments. And if you're into wild builds, forgotten tech, and mechanical insanity, hit subscribe. The next one might be even crazier.